law enforcement, your safety, and our community. The race for Hamilton County Sheriff. From WCPO 9 News and the Western Economic Council, the candidates debate.
And good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Craig McKee. You know, few local offices are as important as the sheriff's office, especially during this time of racial tension, demands to defund the police, Black Lives Matter, and calls for reforming the justice system itself. Tonight, you will hear from the two candidates who want to be the top law enforcement officer in Hamilton County. We'd like to thank both Democrat Charmaine McGuffey and Republican Bruce Hoffbauer for making time to join us to talk about this critical race. Ms. McGuffey spent 33 years with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department, retiring as a major and was also the former commander of the jail and court services. Mr. Hoffbauer spent 34 years in law enforcement, mostly with the Cincinnati Police Department, and 16 years as a lieutenant. He has served in positions such as District 3 Commander and Traffic Unit Investigator. We'd like to thank both of you for your service to our community, and thank you, of course, for joining us right now for this debate. We'd also like to acknowledge our partners in this debate, the Western Economic Council.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Batter, and I currently serve as president of the Western Economic Council. On behalf of our board, our members, and the community at large, I would like to thank both candidates for their commitment to public service and their participation in this debate. I would also like to thank WCPO for once again partnering with us to produce this event and help us reach a wider audience. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to hearing from our next sheriff in this exciting debate.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. First off, because news developments can dramatically change the dynamics of an election, we want you to know that we are recording this debate the evening of Wednesday, October 7th. Here's how the format will work. We will alternate which candidate answers the questions first. I'm going to be asking the questions along with some members of the Western Economic Council. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, then another minute and a half for rebuttal. If I feel more discussion is needed, each side can have up to another 60 seconds. But first, we have 2-minute opening statements. We did toss a coin before coming out here to the studio, and Mr. Hoffbauer, you will start.
Thank you, Craig, and I want to thank WCPO for having this debate. As I said before, this office for sheriff is probably one of the most important elections specifically for sheriff in Hamilton County, and I look forward to being your next sheriff in Hamilton County. This is something that's very rich to me. My family is deep in law enforcement. My father, my wife are retired police officers, my daughter's a police officer, and my son is a Cincinnati firefighter. So this just isn't something that I do, it's who I am. And as I talked about in our first debate, I hit on some very important things. I talked about honesty, integrity, and accountability. That's what we need from our sheriff here in Hamilton County, and that's what I will bring to the table. But let me go back to our first debate. There were a couple things that were said there, and I want to talk about honesty and integrity. And Ms. McGuffey was not honest with us in the first debate. Two things came to mind. First, she said she was dismissed from the sheriff's office because she called out excessive use of force and mistreatment of females at the Justice Center. That's not true. Ms. McGuffey was fired because 31 employees came forward with hostile work environment complaints. These were men, women, white and black. There was an internal investigation. The internal investigation showed that Ms. McGuffey was dishonest. So Sheriff Neal had no alternative but then remove her from that post. He offered her a civilian position, which she declined. She refused to show up to work. She was AWOL and she was dismissed. The second thing that was not true was that Ms. McGuffey lied about was racial problems at the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, systemic racism. I said that I didn't think it occurred. Ms. McGuffey said that she saw the justice and injustice, when in fact, Ms. McGuffey, while in uniform in a training exercise as a supervisor, assaulted, punched an African-American employee in the face during this training exercise. So my question is this: is that the kind of person that you want to run the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office? I think honesty and integrity is what we need, and I hope for the rest of this debate and campaign, Ms. McGuffey is honest.
Ms. McGuffey, your 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you so much, Craig, and thank you for having me here, and thank you to the WEC, and thank you to WCPO. What I'd like to do first is let everybody know I'm Charmaine McGuffey, and I'm running for Sheriff of Hamilton County. You know, as a young girl, first of all, I was born in Cincinnati, and I grew up in Price Hill, and I can remember playing in the tot lot and eating at Price Hill Chili with my mom and 2 sisters. And you know, as a young girl, I pursued my dream of being a police officer, even though I was told that women could not be police officers. I earned a degree from the University of Cincinnati, as well as graduated from Western Hills High School. And you know, I joined the Sheriff's Department and had a 33-year career with the Sheriff's Office. And in my 33-year career, I commanded 2 of the largest divisions of the Sheriff's Office. I supervised 600 employees and personnel, and I also had the care and custody of 1,400 prisoners. I as well managed a large budget, and I have a record of bringing large budgets into control, and that is one of the things I'll do as sheriff. I will make sure and certain that we spend the taxpayer money wisely. And, you know, I will say this, I am a leader and a fiscal manager. I'm a collaborator, I'm a problem solver, and I get things done. When I became the major of Jail and Court Services, our jail was rated the worst jail in the state of Ohio. And under my leadership, because it was my responsibility to fix that jail, I brought that jail up to the best ranked jail in the state of Ohio, and I won an award as Law Officer of the Year for it. I am here as a law and order candidate. I absolutely care about public safety. It will be my priority, and I am tonight going to ask for your vote. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you both for your opening statements. Let's begin our debate. Our first question deals with your priority list. Obviously, you hit the ground running on day one, whichever one of you becomes our next sheriff in Hamilton County. I'm sure there is a long list of things you're already thinking about that you would like to do. We would like to ask you for that top thing. What is the very top list? What does that look like? What's that number one thing you do? Not a laundry list. I want the top thing that is your main focus on that day one. Mr. Hoffbauer, you are first.
The first thing that I want to bring to the Sheriff's Office is complete transparency. I think in my history as a police officer, and as you said, 34 years with the Cincinnati Police Department, I go back a long way. And I remember quite often when policing was not transparent, so we didn't gain the support of the community, which we really needed to have. Over time, we have got that in policing throughout Hamilton County and throughout the country. We had a couple hiccups, but we're working that all the time. So transparency. And off of that, I would work at accountability. Accountability now goes hand in hand with transparency. We have to be accountable as law enforcement executives for our actions and for the men and women that we lead. We have to make sure that the community understands that if we do something wrong, and we will, because we're human beings, we have to be accountable for our mistakes and own up to them. And we have to engage the community. Now, I know this is a little bit of a laundry list, but this all goes into the transparency. We have to work and engage in the community, because without that, again, to the top thing, transparency is not there. We have to let the folks out in the community look inside the organization and see what we have to offer. We have to information share with the community, because sometimes we operated in silos in law enforcement, and that can't be the case anymore. Again, back to the transparency. It's this great big glass that we're going to look into so everybody can see what we're doing. We have to be honest with what we're doing. And we have to include everybody. There are so many factions in policing, in the community, that we have to connect with, collaborate with. If that is the faith-based community, if that is working with children, working with the schools, working with any type of organizations within the community, that all goes back to the transparency issue. And that would be the number one thing I want to bring and offer to the Sheriff's Office.
All right, Ms. McGuffey, 90 seconds.
My first priority is going to be the budget. I'm going to create a timeline to get that budget under control. Right now, it's at approximately $80 million. My opponent in the primary, Sheriff Jim Neal, was $18 million over his original budget. And it is my primary goal to bring that budget into line, to get it under control, and to do the fair thing for the taxpayers of Hamilton County. You know, when I was the major of Jail and Court Services, you know, one of the things that I did, I started out with a $36 million budget, and I did a personnel audit. And through that personnel audit, in conjunction with the Hamilton County Commissioners, we decided that we needed, and I needed, to invest in personnel, because it showed that our safety was in jeopardy for our officers. and that's a priority I have. Safety for the officers, safety for everyone working in that jail, and safety for the prisoners that are housed in that jail. So we appropriated and invested money in our personnel so that we could bring more personnel on, and we created a budget that could sustain that with the cooperation and collaboration of the county commissioners. And that is exactly how you manage money, particularly when the county commissioners they are the organization that provides the money for the sheriff's office. And the sheriff's office, quite frankly, the jail has an outsized budget, outsized of all of the other divisions of the sheriff's office, which is the court services and patrol. So I did manage a budget, was quite large. In the end, it ended up being $43 million, I believe. And you know, I'm absolutely proud of the fact that I increased the personnel, and I did it through a professional audit. We commissioned a national firm from Colorado to come in, and we counted everything from top to bottom. It was my responsibility. I did it, and I'm going to do that same thing as sheriff. And
I did give you, actually, you got 2 minutes there. I said 90 seconds. You did go 2 minutes, 90-second rebuttal.
Well, sure. Ms. McGuffey talks about the budget, and the budget is a huge part of the sheriff's office. We have to look at that. And when she was there and she was employed as a major, she took a lot of credit for good things that were happening in the jail and the Justice Center and the sheriff's office. But she doesn't want to take credit for the bad things. The budget has never been in good shape. It never has. And I know she mentioned right now a $43 million budget, but our last debate, I think she said $36 million. So that's quite a difference in what she says that she managed. But understand that the sheriff employs very smart money people. The sheriff is not the person who crunches the numbers. He or she has to oversee how the money is being spent. And so you employ people in court services, the road patrol, and the corrections division to make sure that the budget is being managed properly. It's not the sheriff crunching the numbers, but ultimately it is his or her responsibility. And I don't think that the budget was controlled very well under Ms. McGuffey's command. And I would say that I would tighten that belt. The word no has to exist in that budget. Sometimes people are just given a lot of leeway and the checkbook is open, and we have to treat that checkbook like it's ours. And I know that when Ms. McGuffey was there, that was an open blank check, and all of the budgeting didn't happen. That's why they're in the trouble that they are now. But when I become the sheriff, I will make sure that budget is one of the top priorities.
Ms. McGuffey.
Yes, I would like to respond to that. First of all, I don't say no to personnel safety. I don't say no to issues in the jail that are my priority, to keep our officers safe, to bring the number of officers in so that we have the appropriate amount of staff, to work with the county commissioners. And you know, if my opponent knew about the sheriff's office, he would know, as I do, from working with the sheriff and being so closely interactive with the sheriff, the chief, and our fiscal people, that the sheriff does interact with the budget, as does the major. It's exactly why I commissioned the audit, so that we could find out exactly what we're spending our money on, because there are so many other things in our jail, in our sheriff's office, that demand money, that demand funding. But we have to place priorities. And I will never, once again, say no to my officers in that jail. They count. They're police officers, some of them are jail security officers, some of them are support staff officers, and those officers are important to me. So yes, when I found out that we could not sustain safety for our officers with the budget that we had, I did the right thing. I commissioned an audit, a professional one, and I will always err on the side of my officers. I will always stand up for them. I'll stand with them for their safety, and I will never say no to personnel demands about safety.
All right, our next question comes from the Western Economic Council member, Dan McCarthy.
Jail overcrowding has been a problem in Hamilton County for a number of years. While the sheriff plays one role in the situation, what I want to know is, how are you going to interact with the judges, county commissioners, and the prosecutor to help solve the problem? Thank you.
All right, Ms. McGuffey.
Thank you. It's a great question. It's exactly what I did as major. One of the very first things I started doing was talking to the judges. I went to the joint session. I presented exactly what our jail looked like as far as the number of populations, the amount of inmates, the classification of those inmates, how we could start restoring our jail to a population that was manageable, because quite literally we were having prisoners sleep in boats and on the floor and so forth. And as I said, it was rated the worst jail in the state of Ohio. So it was very important for me to talk to the judges, interact with them, and I had many interactions with them. I called them personally when I needed, certain information about prisoners, when I wanted the judges to know about how many prisoners we're releasing and taking in a day. A jail is a very complicated place. I mean, we can take in up to 100 prisoners a day and release almost that many in a day. It's an incredible amount of moving parts and people all working towards the same goal, which is to maintain a safe environment, to incarcerate people, but yet have the care, custody. And the other thing about that was I wanted reform, and I talked to the judges about reform. And in fact, I did partner with a judge for the change court for the women who I created the Women's Heroin Recovery Pod for. I talked to the judge about that. She created the change court, and she really helped me. She really helped me get those women, off the street, get them into our program in the jail, and it was very supportive. It was a great joint effort. I had a joint effort with the audit with the county commissioners. We spent a month on that. My supervisors got awards for all of their work on that. We worked hours and hours on counting things, on working with the budget, on finding out where we could, best use our dollars and make our sheriff's department the most efficient department in Hamilton County.
Mr. Hoffbauer.
So the idea of overcrowding and the problem with overcrowding has happened over time. It happened when I was a police officer on the street. I felt the frustrations when I took someone to the jail, and I know that is always a concern. But let me bring up a couple points. The sheriff has to follow the rule of law. That's his or her job, follow the rule of law. It's not up to the sheriff to decide how many people are in the jail. The judges are the ones who sentence people, and sometimes the sentencing is very strict. Now, I believe that there are programs in the jail, work release details, properly supervised, work inside of the facility that can get the men and women who are locked up good time off of their sentence to help reduce the jail population. Also, working with the judges and the prosecutor is the key thing with the sheriff about getting the most minor of offenses not kept in jail, saving that space for the most violent of offenders. That's important. Now, Ms. McGuffey talks about working with the judges and having a great relationship. Let me go back a little bit in history. When she was the major there, she was actually held in contempt of court by Judge Bachman. She was releasing inmates against the judge's order. He held her in contempt. However, that was fixed and that practice stopped. But again, that goes back to the thing I said in my opening, honesty and integrity, and we have to call it how we see it. We take credit for good, and we have to take credit for bad. So the work programs are great, and when you talk about a jail rating, Ms. McGuffey keeps talking about taking the jail from the worst to the best. Well, there is no jail rating in Ohio. Prisons are rated, not the Hamilton County Justice Center. And what happened when what she's talking about with the jail rating was, it was in such bad shape that Sheriff Neal had to hire additional people to come in and work with Ms. McGuffey to get the jail back in order. And so they started to make some progress with the amount of people that were in the jail and how the conditions of the jail were. And then Ms. McGuffey took credit for the work of other individuals.
Ms. McGuffey, rebuttal?
Yes, I would like to rebuttal to that. I'd like to say this. First of all, we do have and did have the worst jail in the state of Ohio. Jails are ranked. They are ranked by a group of individuals with the Department of Rehabilitation, and those individuals come down as inspectors. They go through your jail, they count everything, they look at your policy and procedure, and they rank your jail on whether or not you have complied with certain elements, whether it's essential or whether it's an important element. And those are things that had to have my scrutiny as the major of that jail. I signed off on all of the paperwork. I absolutely was included in all of the emails. I went to all of the meetings, and it's exactly what I'll do as sheriff. I will stay engaged. I will understand the numbers. And as far as the jail population goes, I'll tell you what influences the jail population is trying to cut recidivism. And that's exactly what I did. I brought in the Women's Heroin Recovery Program, the Men's Veterans Program, and the Men's Exit Program so that we could move people along in their lives so that they don't return to jail. They can learn how to get their driver's license back. They can learn how to get a job, how to write a resume, and they have help when they walk out that door of the jail. You know, I was releasing inmates because we were under a sheriff's order to do so. And, you know, there are judges that don't like some of those rules. But, you know, again, as the major, as the sheriff of Hamilton County, I have to follow the rules and I have to follow the dictates and the laws that make us have a particular jail population over another.
90 seconds.
Yes, so I would comment that Ms. McGuffey said that she was following the sheriff's orders. Well, the sheriff takes orders from the judges about who is released. So I've still yet to hear the answer about releasing prisoners and being held in contempt of court. Again, another program that Ms. McGuffey takes credit for is the Veterans Pod at the Justice Center. Now, I know that Ms. McGuffey supports that, as do I, and I think it's a great program, along with the heroin pods and other things like that. Those are great programs. But that veteran pod was actually started by a nun who was working in the Justice Center, who has now passed away, and she is the one who got that into the court with Judge Powers and Judge Cooper. And although supported by Ms. McGuffey, again, I wish she would not take credit for things that other people have done in the Sheriff's Office and in the Justice Center. So again, prisons are rated, the Justice Center is not rated. And what happens when people come in to look at the look at the jail, they look and give recommendations to try to get you up to standards. It's not something you get a failing grade for and you're in some sort of trouble. It's different in prisons than it is in the Justice Center.
All right, moving on to our next question here, the issue of transparency. The WCPO team has reported on use of force incidents within the Hamilton County Corrections facility and by Hamilton Corrections officers there. In 2017, in fact, we documented discipline against a number of officers, 14 of them from 2013 to 2017 for violating the use of force policy. In half of those cases, officers received counseling, the lowest level of discipline. In nearly every case, even officers there, who clearly used excessive force were not disciplined for excessive force. Instead, they were disciplined for conduct unbecoming or other violations. If you become sheriff, what policies and procedures will you put in place that will hold deputies accountable for unnecessary use of force? And how would your administration ensure deputies properly document the use of force? Mr. Hoffbauer.
Well, I can tell you that the excessive use of force concept idea has been a problem. And when I am your sheriff, I'm going to address it in many ways. First of all, there is no tolerance for that. My opponent says she has a zero tolerance for excessive use of force. My response is, when did we ever have a tolerance for excessive use of force? And we have to understand the difference between what's excessive and what's unnecessary, between excessive and what's unnecessary. I don't think Ms. McGuffey quite understands that. But the excessive use of force, if an officer or a deputy, either on the road patrol, in corrections, or court services, uses excessive use of force, then that should be brought to my attention immediately. The supervisor investigating that needs to take a look at that immediately, and it should go up the chain of command at once. It should not sit on anyone's desk. In order to afford administrative justice in any law enforcement community, and inside the agency, you have to follow a matrix. You have to have a strong policy, strong rules and regulations that lay out exactly what the officer did, what he violated or what she violated, and you have to have a matrix to follow. Now, I think the sheriff's office over time has not had a strong matrix for that, but that's something that I would put in place immediately, that you follow progressive discipline, and if it warrants criminal charges, then that will happen. If it warrants suspension, that will happen. And I go back to Ms. McGuffey talks about excessive use of force when she was there. If this was such a problem, where was she? She says she called it out because it was happening, but she never said a thing until she was dismissed from her job. Excessive use of force cannot be tolerated. I never tolerated it as a Cincinnati police officer. I would never tolerate that as the sheriff of Hamilton County, and I look forward to getting in there and getting some good plans in place so we can be transparent to the community.
All right, Ms. McGuffey, 2 minutes.
I find two things interesting. One is that my opponent says, well, when was there ever excessive use of force? Just exactly what you just said. There was excessive use of force in that jail in 2014, 2015, and 2016. I had a zero tolerance for that, and I absolutely complained about it. I brought it to the table a number of times, and it's exactly why I was fired, because I refused to stand down. I was told to go with the flow. And I also find it interesting that my opponent talks about excessive use of force, and he was found guilty of excessive use of force by the city manager when he shot and killed an unarmed black man. And the city manager at the time refused to back down from that finding, even though he was pressured by the police union at the time. And my opponent received absolutely no consequence of that excessive use of force, none. And he continued on his career and was never, ever held accountable for it. I will hold the officers accountable. I will have a policy for zero excessive use of force tolerance, and I will also create transparency around that. Exactly what you laid out is exactly what happened in that jail. There were officers that weren't held accountable. I was knowledgeable about it. I continued to complain about it and continue to talk about it. And of course, it cost me my job. But you know what? I would do it again tomorrow because it's the right thing to do. It's exactly why I'm wearing the uniform, and it's why I wear the badge so proudly. I will say this, when we talk about fixing excessive use of force, one of the last policies that we were able to certify with our jail audit, from the state, was our use of force policy. It wasn't up to date. I had to make calls, I had to work those last minute issues and deals with people that were working with that policy and bring that policy into line and call those jail inspectors at the very last minute before they made their decision. And we passed that jail inspection because of it.
All right, Mr. Hoffbauer, rebuttal.
If the use of force policy was not up to date, Ms. McGuffey was a major at the jail, and that fell under her watch. She says that she continued to bring that up and she was fired because of that. And again, as I said in my opening, that's not the case. This is fact-based, and it is very easy to find that Ms. McGuffey was fired for dishonesty in creating a hostile work environment and then being AWOL from her post. That's why she was fired. But as far as my case 30 years ago, when I was involved in a life and death encounter, and I did have to discharge my weapon and I did have to take the life of an individual, that was a very difficult time for me. I had to carry that with me and have carried that with me for 30 years. No police officer ever wants to have to do that, never. But knowing that it might happen, you have to be properly trained to know that you have to do it to save your life or the life of someone else. And that's what I did. And at the time, Gerald Newfarmer, who was the city manager, made a comment before the facts were in. Ms. McGuffey is mistaken. He made a comment, an opinion, that was not true, that he thought there was excessive force because he didn't have the facts. But once you deal in facts, as I talk about the cases with Ms. McGuffey, when you deal in facts, you get to the truth. And when you get the truth, you get the honest answer. And so what happened was, when my case was reviewed, it was reviewed by the Internal Affairs of the Cincinnati Police Department, by the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, by a diverse panel put together by Mr. Newfarmer, which was of male and women, white and black, and the homicide squad, and everyone said that I was proper in my use of force, it was not excessive, and I was cleared, and I did it to save my life.
All right. Ms. McGuffey, rebuttal.
So what I will say to that is this. You know, it is very, very important, and I was one of Bruce's supervisors when he worked at our jail. He was there as a probationary line officer for 1.5 years. And one of the things I remember talking to him about as one of his sergeants was integrity counts. And, you know, I don't know if he paid attention to that, but I think it's important. You know, it's an important message that I give to every new line officer. He did leave and go to Cincinnati Police Department, which brings the point to me that, you know, he wasn't there for any of these happenings. He has no idea. He was with a different department. He had a career in an entirely different way than my career. He wasn't there for any of the situations that I was ever involved in or that many of our officers were involved in. And he uses this word fact like somehow he is the person who determines the facts. Well, he's not. I know the facts because I was there. I was there as a supervisor. I started as a line officer, and then I became a sergeant, and then I became a lieutenant, and then I became a major. And I'm very well aware of how that sheriff's department works, and I have worked in nearly every facet of that sheriff's department. So, you know, my opponent is absolutely not knowledgeable about what went on, and he continues to distort my record to distract from the fact that he has absolutely minimal experience in our sheriff's office and cannot have and doesn't have a plan, in fact, doesn't have a plan for the office.
Okay, going on to our next question here. It comes from Western Economic Council member Mary Sullivan Schultz.
In the current environment of defund the police that we find ourselves in, both on a national and local level, I was wondering, given especially the budget situation in Hamilton County, do you think that the sheriff's budget should be defunded or reimagined? And if so, what would those changes look like?
All right, Ms. McGuffey, your turn.
As I said initially, I actually invested in our personnel. I invested in increasing our staff. I invested in ways to keep our personnel safe and everyone safe who works in that jail. I have said that I am not a proponent of defunding the police. I think we need the police. I think what we do when we look at funding, and I'm very good at looking at funding, and it's what I did as the major. When we look at funding, we start talking about training and how we can fund appropriate training for the police and how we can bring in other agencies and other people who have expertise in the mental health arena, who have expertise in the social service arena, so that people come in from those arenas and help our officers understand mental illness, help our officers understand responding to people that are struggling with their lives, so that we can strengthen the police's response to a lot of the things that they go to that aren't of a high caliber, because there are people who are experiencing mental illness, homelessness, and as I said, just struggles in life. I mean, I think that defunding the police is something that we should not do. I'm for the police. I want to strengthen the police. I want to train the police. I want to build the department, and I want our sheriff's department to be the best in the state of Ohio. But, you know, honestly, there are a lot of things that require funding. When we talk about the police, we talk about equipment, we talk about weapons, we talk about all of the things that enable police to do their job in a very dangerous situation. I want to address that as well, because certainly there can be dangerous situations. I was the lead hostage negotiator on our SWAT team, and I'm very familiar with what those dangerous situations are, and sometimes you do have to have that assault vehicle, because some of these guys, you know, they have armor-piercing rounds, they have all manner of firepower, and you have to have an assault vehicle. You have to keep your personnel safe, and as I said, that is my priority.
All right, Mr. Hoffbauer.
So I'll go back real quick. What I bring out are facts. These are facts and they are undisputed. And the reason I bring them out is because I want to give the voters, I want to give the listeners a clear compare and contrast to find out who they think has the best honesty and integrity to lead this sheriff's office. I need to remind Ms. McGuffey, we've had this discussion before, she was never my supervisor. I spent 1.5 years in the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office assigned to the Corrections Division. I was very proud of my time there, and I learned a tremendous amount when I wore that black shirt. I learned how to talk to people in the jail, and that helped me when I got out onto the street. Helped me save my life, it helped me be safe, and it helped me interact with the community even better. When we talk about this issue of defunding the police, Ms. McGuffey just said that we should not do that. Well, I will never defund the police. I was from the very beginning when the defund the police came out and the People Safety Reimagined concept came out. I said immediately I was against this. Ms. McGuffey wavered and she never came out right away and said she was against defunding the police. Even the concept of the People Safety's Reimagined that almost got onto the ballot here in the city of Cincinnati to do away with the Cincinnati Police Department or cut it down tremendously. It wasn't until the night before the election or that was going to be on the ballot did Ms. McGuffey come out and say that she was against it, because I think there was information there was not enough votes. So I got the information out immediately that I'm not for this. I am against the defunding, but I am for investing in the men and women who work there, investing in the training, investing in the equipment, investing it in the people who want to make that their life. I believe in the social service workers and the mental health professionals. What she didn't get to do, but what I got to do as a police officer in the city of Cincinnati, is go out on runs in the community with people who are suffering from mental illness and social issues. And there were people assigned to the police districts that we took out with us. That's something I would bring to the sheriff's office. Mental health professionals working side by side, social workers side by side with law enforcement instead of letting mental health professionals and social workers go out into harm's way and try to figure out what's going on. They will work with law enforcement when I'm the sheriff.
Ms. McGuffey, rebuttal?
I would like to say that it's interesting that my opponent talks about community engagement and the fact that he wants to increase in community engagement. We had 2 community forums just last week that he was invited to and he declined to come. One was with Christ Church and the other one was an Amos community forum to talk about the jail and talk about ways that we can move people along in life. And those community forums are very important. And people come to those, they tune into those because they want to know what their sheriff is going to do. And that's exactly who I am. I go to the community forums. I've created relationships. When I took over as major of that jail, I created a committee called the RAP Committee, working to refer appropriate placement. And in that committee, I invited people to the table. So what I did is I filled in the moat around the jail, I dropped the drawbridge, and I put the welcome sign out. And Sister Gutierrez was one of the people that came to that meeting and came to that committee, and she was a fabulous, fabulous person. She had been in several wars, and she was very, very good about ministering to the veterans in our jail. And I made that a priority so that we could help her do that in that way. And that, again, is a relationship that I fostered, that I cared for in the community, and I had community relationships with the people in the mental health community. I went out to the meetings, I went to homeless meetings, I created some homeless initiative meetings myself and brought those people in from the mental health community. I'm very well aware of what the community needs and I communicate well with them.
One quick follow-up here. Each of you will get 60 seconds. It's tied to the Defund the Police or Reimagine process. Is there one element at all, being on the outside and maybe not understanding the full budget maybe of the Sheriff's Department right now, is there one component at all that you could see taking money from and putting it in another area right now? Is there one place within the Sheriff's Department that you see as kind of a waste area that should be shifted to another spot? Mr. Hoffbauer.
I would look at, as much as training is important, and we have to train our men and women to give them the proper tools and make them safe, sometimes there's training that is not necessary, and that's a waste of dollars. And I would look at and see if personnel, are we duplicating services inside and outside of the Sheriff's Office? Are we spending monies frivolously on things that we should not be spending that on? So to say, is there one thing? It would be difficult to grab one thing. Of course, I would never be in favor of doing away with any of the street strength, the strength in the Justice Center, the strength in court services. I would look if there are other services that are being duplicated and save the monies there, and then use that to reinvest in the organization and bring in better things like social services and mental health so we can partner up with those folks and get out into the community.
60 seconds.
Thank you. I would never, ever sacrifice training to fix a budget. I would never do that. Training is your most important element of your personnel. That's exactly what keeps your personnel safe. It's exactly why they know what to do and how to do it. If I were going to look at the budget and I needed more money from somewhere, I can say this because I'm very familiar with the Sheriff's Office. We do not waste money, right? And when we talk about funding the things that need to be funded in that jail, in the courthouse, out at road, but what we can do is look at other funding sources, and we can look for grants, and we can partner with our community partners and with businesses in Cincinnati so that we can create some funding revenue so that it can enhance our department without increasing the budget.
All right, our next question. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Office is part of the Ohio Collaborative Community Police Advisory Board effort. As a component of participating in the Ohio Collaborative, law enforcement agencies agree to implement and also to adapt the standards that have been developed to help bring consistency around several high-profile topics. For example, use of force, bias-free policing, and vehicle pursuits, just to name a few. What is your understanding of how these standards are developed and implemented, and what role do you believe the Sheriff's Department can play in compliance with these particular standards? And this first question goes to Mr. Hoffbauer.
So I believe that is a 12-panel group of individuals who look at these use of force and the bias-free policing and pursuits and things like that. And what I see the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office is doing is, because the office is so big, the Sheriff's Office is so big, is to bring people from the Sheriff's Office to the table. Because here's what's happened, and here's one of the problems in policing right now. no centralized or uniform type training. When I was the police academy commander at the Cincinnati Police Department, one of the things I did was bring in a concept of regional training so that we didn't have all of these police academies all over the state that were training either the bare minimum or almost some things that weren't even proper. So in order to make sure that the men and women who are out there in law enforcement that are all trained the same, we have to look at this regional training concept, and we have to discuss what's going on with police pursuits, use of force, so that we're all operating together. As a deputy sheriff, I might call in another agency to come help me. And if he or she comes help me, now we are using the same training. We're operating as one. We wear different uniforms. We might have smaller policy changes, but when it comes to these key issues, pursuits and uses of force, we're all operating under one umbrella. And because Hamilton County is so large, they need to come to the table. One of the problems I see, as again when I was the commander of the police academy, is that OPADO, the Ohio Police Officer Training Commission, is made up from a lot of police officers from smaller agencies. And sometimes those smaller agencies, the rules and regulations and standards are set by those smaller agencies. So really the best thing to do is to have larger agencies come together, including smaller agencies, on this panel, come up with the best idea that we can train our men and women the best, so we're all operating under the same umbrella when it comes to use of force, vehicle pursuits, so there's less confusion, and if there is an incident out there, it's easier to explain, it's easier to talk about.
Ms. McGuffey, your response?
Sure. The collaborative agreement really is centered around community engagement and how the community feels about their police department, the transparency, the accountability of the police department, and those people that come to the table for that have done a tremendous job, particularly with the collaborative agreement at Cincinnati Police Department, which, by the way, was brought about and in fact as one of the results of what my opponent brags about, being the commander of a Vortex unit that literally did sweeps through the city, you know, and they would sweep and they would collect people who were in predominantly African-American neighborhoods and arrest them for open container, disorderly conduct, loitering, jaywalking, and those people ended up at our jail and ballooned our population. And it was shortly after that unit operated with you know, such notoriety that the collaborative agreement came about. And people had to say, you know, listen, we have to remedy some of these bad policing behaviors. So absolutely, I think that the collaborative agreement is a great thing. I, as the sheriff of Hamilton County, am going to create a citizens review panel, and that citizens review panel will be made up of volunteers of the various communities in Hamilton County. And that panel will be given the respect and the transparency that it deserves. They'll be able to view our policies. They'll be able to weigh in on certain things that we do in the Sheriff's Department and maybe things that we can do better. And I think that's a huge piece to transparency and accountability in your department when you're willing to open the doors and ask community leaders to come in and sit at your table. And it's exactly what I've said I will do, and it's what I've done my entire career. I'm a collaborator, I'm a problem solver, and I get things done.
Mr. Hoffbauer, 90 seconds.
Sure. I want to thank Ms. McGuffey for the credit for the collaborative agreement work that I did, because she is again mistaken on what she said. The collaborative agreement came in 2001, after the riots in 2001, which I was in. And I don't know where Ms. McGuffey was, but I was in the riots. And I can tell you that we made tremendous progress in community relations, and I was a part of that. I was assigned to District 1 where that was all happening, so I was a big part of that. And the Vortex unit didn't start till 2006. So from 2006 to 2008, that's when the Vortex unit was there. And that was put in place because violent crime was so out of control in Over the Rhine, so out of control, something had to be done. We can collaborate and talk all day, but there had to be some action. So it wasn't sweeps and it wasn't grabbing people off the street. We were looking for the most violent of offenders to put them in jail. And we use good policing to find those violent offenders to put them in jail. So when we talk about the collaborative agreement, I was part of that, and Ms. McGuffey is mistaken. The table has been set for some time. I've been at the table with the community folks, the faith-based community, talking about issues in policing since 2001. She's quite late to the table. She's very confused on her dates and times. So I just want to say that the Over the Rhine has been revitalized because of the work with Vortex and the collaboration we used with District 1 and brought that place back. And now we see it's very vibrant, bars, restaurants, homes, children there. That's what good policing can do when you collaborate.
Ms. McGuffey, 90 seconds.
What I will say about my opponent is this. My opponent did run the Vortex unit, and my opponent continues to distract and distort from my record. And again, I'll just have to remind you, it's because he wants people to be distracted from the fact that he did not work significantly in the sheriff's office. He worked as a line probationary staff officer. He was not a supervisor. I rose in the rank from sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then major of that jail, and I worked in nearly every facet of the police department of our, sheriff's department. And in that regard, I will tell you that I did collaborate with the communities, and I do know a great deal about the different communities in Cincinnati and in Hamilton County and what some of their issues and some of the things are that they want to do. In fact, I'm very well aware that the Lincoln Heights community wants to move the Cincinnati shooting range because they've been putting up with, for years, with the gunshots, and that is really not a great way to live, and certainly they have to live there. That's their chosen community. Some of them live there because that's, what they can afford and where they wanted to live, and they shouldn't be forced to move and look for other housing because the Cincinnati firing range is, and has been for a very long time, very loud, lots of gunfire and so forth. And some of these people are experiencing PTSD, and that's something else I found out when I went out and talked to the community out there in Lincoln Heights.
All right. Our next question now comes from Western Economic Council member Gary Kester.
There's been a push by some both nationally and locally to pass no cash bail laws, but the idea of someone robbing our bank or invading my home and being right back on the streets because we've eliminated bail bonds concerns me. Where do each of you stand on the issue of having no cash bail?
All right, Ms. McGuffey, you're up first.
First of all, someone who is robbing someone and who is invading a home is committing a crime against person. And a crime against person would not qualify for a no cash bail. No cash bails are designed for the lower level offenders who have not committed a crime against person and who are deemed not dangerous to society should they be released from jail. I do believe that no cash bail is something that's very important for our community to embrace. I happen to know of many situations of prisoners languishing in our jail for minor crimes, minor things that they did wrong, or maybe they did wrong. I mean, you're accused, right? And you're supposed to be innocent until you're proven guilty. Well, these people have been arrested on some minor things. They have to sit in jail for up to a week, sometimes 2 weeks, before they can get their case in front of a judge. And what happens is then they fall further into poverty. We can take their vehicles, they can lose their housing, they can lose their jobs. We separate them from their children and their family. And we take money from them because it's expensive to navigate the criminal justice system. And all the while, they're sitting in our jail without the proper due process that they're due. There are many people out there that can afford bail for a minor crime, that can afford $50. I know people who cannot afford $50. I absolutely do. And they will languish in jail for weeks and lose everything they have, anything at all that they have. And then we release them from our jail and we say, now go out and do better with less. And that never made sense to me. So there is a great distinction when we talk about bail, and that's a very careful thing. And I know that there are many judges out there on the Democratic slate who are actually, wanting to embrace this idea that we don't push people further into poverty when they become incarcerated for minor issues.
All right, Mr. Hoffbauer, 2 minutes.
The no cash bail issue was something that my opponent talked about on 700 WLW, where she said she was in favor of no cash bail. And now she says, well, I'm in favor of no cash bail for the most minor of offenses. I've said that all along. I think that no cash bail or a very low dollar bail for the minor of offenses is absolutely something we should be researching and doing. I think that that's a possibility. But understand that bail or bond is set by a judge. Again, I go back to one of my opening statements. The rule of law, the judges set this. And as a sheriff, you have to follow that. Now, this comes with collaboration with the sheriff and the judge and the prosecutors to work on that, but we have to follow the rule of law. Imagine this. You're in your home gets broken into, and the police show up and they catch the individual who committed this crime. They get arrested, they take them down to the Justice Center for processing. And because they might be poor, they're indigent, we're going to release that person and do a process and send them out. Now, how does that feel to the homeowner? So there are offenses against property that are very serious, and there are offenses against individuals that are very serious. So we can't say that no cash bail is a good thing. Even Mayor de Blasio in New York, a very liberal mayor in the city of New York, they did this no cash bail thing. And he came out and said it was terrible. They had more recidivism, they had more violent crimes, because what they did was put individuals who have a trade of committing crime right back out onto the street. The idea of bail and bond is to make sure that someone shows up for court, to make sure that somebody makes their court appearance, to make sure that based on the history of their record, if they are a flight risk, the degree of the offense is going to affect what their bond is. So to just say no cash bail is absolutely a disaster. So again, good collaboration with the judges. Ms. McGuffey hasn't had that in her history. She was held in contempt of court by a judge. And so when I'm the sheriff, I will work with the judges and the prosecutors to see if we can work for no cash bail or low cash bail for minor offenses.
Ms. McGuffey, rebuttal?
Yes. People are pushed further into poverty the longer they stay in jail. And as I said, there are dictates and outlines for a no cash bail. There always has been. My opponent's been unaware of it because he hasn't worked in that area of the justice system ever, really. He hasn't determined how many people are coming in and out of that jail, how long they wait to go to court. He has no knowledge of that. I do. I've seen it firsthand. And I understand that there are people who lose things, who lose important things in their lives. They can lose their children because they're sitting in jail and because they can't afford a $100 bail. I think it is something that absolutely has to be looked at, and it is a collaboration, certainly that. It's a collaboration with the judges, the sheriffs, the prosecutor's office, and we can do better. The model that I like to look at is a model from New Jersey. They're doing it very successfully there, and they're doing it successfully in other areas around the country. It's a matter of putting down the details and getting into the weeds of it and making sure that it works properly, and working with other services, working with people that will help you in that regard, that aren't necessarily connected to the sheriff's office, but that are service agencies who service these people, who know who these people are, and help get these people to court when they are out on bail. Certainly any crime against person should not have a no cash bail. I don't know anyone that would agree to that. But what I do know is my opponent knows very little about the topic.
Mr. Hoffbauer, 90 seconds.
So I did spend 1.5 years as a deputy sheriff assigned to the corrections division, as I said before, and I'm very proud of that. I got to see the men and women who work there, and their job is every bit as important as someone who's out on the street. And I can go back to my experience when I was a Cincinnati police officer, talking about this no cash bail. I would arrest people, take them to the Justice Center for them to be processed and be right back out on 9th Street before I could get my paperwork completed and before I could get my gun in my holster, get back in my cruiser. So by the time I was on 9th Street, I saw that individual back out there, probably to reoffend. Because my opponent, I spent 1.5 years in the Justice Center. I think that counts for something. She hasn't spent 1 day in a patrol car on the streets of Cincinnati or in Hamilton County. So I think that gives me some credit for being in the corrections part of this. But because she's never made physical arrest, original arrest, she's never testified in court because of an arrest she made, she doesn't know what it's like to sit in court day in and day out with the same persons that you arrest time and time again for the same offenses because they get processed at the jail and they're right back out in the street. You talk about a waste of money. The amount of money that law enforcement executives, all these police agencies are spending for law enforcement officers in court day in and day out for the same person who is reoffending, doing the same thing because of no cash bail, that's where we're losing money. So the bail and the bond is to make sure the persons are held there until they can have their day in court or they can pay their bonds so they can get into court and we can hear their case.
All right, believe it or not, we are just about out of time. Time has flown by here. We're now going to start with our closing statements. You each get 2 minutes, and Mr. Hoffbauer, due to the coin toss, you go first.
So when I started this debate, and then we did the one last week, I talked about honesty, integrity, and accountability. That's what this really comes down to. And when I bring things up, I'm talking about facts. I'm not being negative. I'm providing the contrast and comparison so the voters of Hamilton County can really look and see who the best person is to run the sheriff's office, lead the men and women in that agency, and to keep them moving forward. So I ask the citizens and the voters this question. When you go home tonight, or when you tuck your kids into bed and you lay down for the night, I want you to think, who do you want to be the sheriff of Hamilton County? Someone who has a mission of safety and security, who has 34 years of impeccable record with the Cincinnati Police Department and my time in the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, and has the best interest of the community in mind? Is that the person that you want there? Or do you want to have Ms. McGuffey, my opponent? Someone who has a history of not being honest, a history of not having integrity, and not being accountable. Ms. McGuffey is on the Brady list for actions that she was involved in when she was a deputy sheriff. She was arrested in Covington, Kentucky, as she came out of a bar and had an altercation with a Covington police officer. That put her on the Brady list. Then she was involved in the incident I spoke about before with the dishonesty in the hostile work environment and her dismissal from the job. That gave her a second spot on the Brady list. She was put there by the prosecutor, not Sheriff Jim Neal. So her testimony in court would be called into question. Her integrity and the integrity of the agency is called into question when we get down to this, when the sheriff is really elected. So I want the folks out there to think, who do you want to be your sheriff? Bruce Hoffbauer, who's here for the right reason, and this is just what I do, it's who I am, and I have an impeccable record? Or do you want Ms. McGuffey, who has a history of dishonesty, fighting with judges, being held in contempt, being arrested, and being on the Brady list?
All right, Ms. McGuffey, your 2-minute closing statement.
Thank you very much. I would like to state that my opponent does not have an unblemished record. He shot and killed an unarmed black man, and it was ruled as excessive force. The other thing I'd like to say is this. I called out bad behavior. I called out use of force, which we just exemplified in this debate, after I was told to stand down, after I was told to be quiet about it, because I absolutely have zero tolerance for excessive use of force, and that is why I was fired from the sheriff's office. I also called out the bad behavior of the police when they were harassing people coming out of a gay bar, and that was an unlawful harassment, and I called it out. I questioned it, and of course, for that, there was going to be retaliation. Whenever you call out excessive use of force, bad behavior on the part of the police, what I want you to think about is every time my opponent criticizes me, every time he talks about the fact that I was held this way, or I was fired from my job, or I had an altercation with the police, I want you to think about why officers don't come forward, why those officers did not stop that officer from killing George Floyd. Why? Because if you do, when you speak up, when you speak out, people like my opponent, Bruce Hoffbauer, will come after you. They will criticize you about it. They will make certain that there is retaliation. They will make certain that you stay quiet and that everybody around you that witnessed misbehavior stays quiet. That's what I want people to think about. And I also want them to think about the fact that my opponent has brought out absolutely not Plan 1. I have a plan. I've put it out there. I've talked about it extensively. My opponent does nothing but focus on distorting my record, my good record of bringing the sheriff's office into, this particular century so that we can get out of that 1950s policing model, which he obviously embraces.
And that is the bell. That means our show is done. We want to thank both, of course, Charmaine McGuffey and Bruce Hoffbauer, for joining us this evening for this debate. We want to thank our partners at the Western Economic Council as well for their contributions to this debate. Have a good night.